The sky above New Brisbane burned orange and red as the first hegemony ships broke through the atmosphere. Administrator Chen Wei stood at the window of the colonial headquarters, watching death descend from the stars. She had received no warning, no message, no demand for surrender. The aliens had simply appeared and begun their attack. "Get everyone to the bunkers," she said. To her assistant, her voice was calm, but her hands shook. Now across the colony, sirens wailed, families grabbed children and ran, farmers abandoned their fields, workers left their posts. Everyone moved toward the underground shelters that had been built for emergencies that no one truly believed would come. Above the planet, Admiral Kethvar watched from the command deck of his flagship. He was an old soldier with many victories behind him, conquering primitive worlds like this. One was routine work. His fleet of 200 ships surrounded the planet like a net around a fish. There would be no escape. "Activate the despair engines," he commanded. His officers obeyed without question. Across the fleet, massive machines hummed to life. These were not weapons that burned or destroyed. They were something far worse. The despair engines broadcast neural frequencies that reached directly into the minds of living creatures. They triggered the deepest evolutionary fears that all prey animals carried in their genes: hopelessness, terror, the absolute certainty that resistance was pointless, and death was the only escape. Every species in the galaxy had fallen to these weapons. The hegemony had conquered 3,000 worlds using this technology. Not a single species had ever resisted the despair engines. When the frequencies hit, civilizations simply gave up. Their people became catatonic, unable to think or act. Then the hegemony troops would land and take control without firing a single shot. Kethar expected this conquest to be no different. In the main bunker beneath New Brisbane's capital city, 3,000 humans huddled together in the dim emergency lighting. Chenny had taken charge, organizing people into groups, assigning tasks, trying to maintain order, but she could feel something wrong. A heaviness settled over her thoughts. A voice in her mind whispered that everything was pointless, that they should simply lie down and wait for death. Around her, people began to weep. Strong men fell to their knees. Women clutched their children and sobbed. The despair spread through the bunker like a disease. Chen Wei felt her own will crumbling. What was the point of fighting? They were alone. They were doomed. They should just accept their fate. Then she heard something strange. In the corner of the bunker, a young soldier named Private Morrison was laughing. It was not happy laughter. It was the desperate sound of a mind that refused to break. Morrison sat against the wall, his rifle across his knees, and he giggled like a man who had lost his sanity. "What's funny?" someone asked him, their voice hollow with despair. Morrison looked up. Tears streamed down his face, but his lips kept twitching into a smile. "Nothing," he said. "Absolutely nothing is funny. That's what's so funny. We're being attacked by aliens on Taco Tuesday. I was really looking forward to tacos." Woman nearby let out a sound that was half sob and half snort. "Taco Tuesday," she repeated. "Yeah," Morrison continued. "The universe has perfect comic timing. Couldn't invade on Monday when we had that terrible casserole. Had to be Taco Tuesday." Another person laughed. Just a small sound, quickly smothered, but it was there. Morrison kept going. He could not stop. The absurdity of their situation had triggered something deep. In his brain, some ancient survival mechanism that his species had developed over millions of years. When the fear became too great, when the threat became too overwhelming, the human mind did not simply collapse. It found another way to cope. I bet the aliens don't even have tacos, Morrison said. That's why they're so angry. They travel across the galaxy, see our delicious tacos, and think we must destroy this. It's jealousy, pure taco jealousy. More people were laughing now, not because the joke was particularly good, it was terrible actually, but the laughter spread anyway, passing from person to person like a contagious disease. The heaviness in their minds remained, but something else rose up to meet it, something stubborn and absurd and completely human. Chen Wei felt the change in herself. The despair was still there, pressing down on her thoughts, but Morrison's ridiculous taco theory had created a small crack in that darkness. Light poured through that crack. Not hope exactly, but something related. Ability to laugh at death itself. Aliens probably have terrible restaurants, another soldier said. 3 stars maximum. That's why they conquered the galaxy looking for good food. They came to the wrong place, a woman replied. Have you eaten at the cafeteria? Here the conquest will be a mercy. The laughter grew louder. People who had been weeping moments ago now wiped their tears and joined in. The jokes were not good, they were stupid and obvious and sometimes made no sense at all, but nobody cared. The act of laughing itself was the point. Each laugh was a small rebellion against the despair that tried to crush them. Admiral Kethabar stared at his sensor displays in confusion. The readings made no sense. The despair engines were operating at full power. Every human on the planet should be catatonic by now. Instead, the neural pattern readings showed something he had never seen before. The human brain waves were not collapsing into despair. They were doing something else entirely. Something his equipment could not interpret. Increase power to 120%. He ordered. The despair engines roared. Below, the humans felt the increased pressure on their minds. The darkness pushed harder. The voice of hopelessness grew louder, and the humans laughed harder. In the bunker, someone had started a comedy competition. People took turns telling the worst jokes they could think of. The worse the joke, the louder the laughter. A man told a pun so terrible that his wife threatened to divorce him. Everyone cheered. Chen found herself laughing so hard that her stomach ached. The despair had not vanished. It still lurked in the corners of her mind, but it no longer controlled her. Every time it tried to take hold, another stupid joke would push it back. We should broadcast this, she said. Suddenly, everyone looked at her. Aliens are trying to break us, she explained. They're failing. They should know they're failing. The technical staff worked quickly. Within minutes, they had established a transmission link to the alien fleet. Chen Wei turned to Morrison. You started this, she said. You should be on camera. Morrison stood before the camera, still giggling. Occasionally, he had no idea what to say, so he simply said what he was thinking. Hey aliens, he began. Your weird sadness ray isn't working. We've got tacos down here. Well, we did before you showed up. Now we probably just have emergency rations, but the point is, we're not giving up. We're actually having a pretty good time considering. You're trying to kill us. Someone just told a joke so bad that I think it qualifies as a war crime. Anyway, here's what we think of your invasion. He launched into an impression of what he imagined an alien admiral sounded like. It was not accurate at all. It was stupid and silly and accompanied by ridiculous hand gestures. The bunker erupted in laughter behind him. When Morrison finished, someone started singing. It was an old Earth song about not worrying and being happy. The song made no sense in context. Their planet was being invaded. They might all die within hours, but one by one, more voices joined in. Soon 3,000 humans were singing together, their voices rising in the underground bunker like a defiant celebration. The broadcast ended on the flagship. Admiral HFY watched the recording 3 times. His officers stood in uncomfortable silence. None of them knew how to react. In 10,000 years of conquest, no species had ever responded to the despair engines like this. What is wrong with them? One officer asked. Keithar had no answer. He had studied human biology before the invasion. They were weak creatures. They had no claws or fangs. Their bodies were fragile. Their technology was primitive. Compared to the hegemony, everything about them suggested they would be easy to conquer, but their minds worked differently. The despair engines targeted the fear responses that all prey animals shared. The technology worked because all sapient species in the galaxy had evolved from prey. They all carried that ancient fear in their genes. Crushed that fear hard enough and any species would break. Humans were prey animals too. They had evolved on a dangerous planet surrounded by predators. They should be just as vulnerable as every other species. Yet they were laughing. Kaver felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare, a cold sensation in his stomach, a tightness in his chest. His species had eliminated such feelings long ago, recognizing them as weaknesses, but he recognized the sensation anyway. It was fear. These creatures were afraid of death, yet they laughed at it. They felt despair, yet they mocked it. They faced overwhelming power, yet they made jokes about tacos. What kind of species was this? What kind of mind could transform terror into comedy? Continue the bombardment. Cathar ordered. Prepare ground forces for landing. He would conquer this world through conventional means, but for the first time in his career, Admiral Keithvar wondered if conquest would be enough. You could take a planet, you could take a city, you could take everything a species owned, but how did you defeat an enemy that laughed at defeat itself? Below in the bunker, Cheney organized her people for whatever came next. The despair still pressed against their minds. The bombardment still shook the ground above them. Their situation remained hopeless by any rational measure, but the laughter continued anyway. Someone was already writing new jokes about the invasion. Someone else was planning a comedy show. For that evening, a group of children had started a game where they made silly faces at imaginary aliens. The humans had discovered something important. Without fully understanding it, their laughter was not just a coping mechanism. It was not just defiance. It was a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced, and they were just getting started. 3 months had passed since the invasion of New Brisbane. The hegemony controlled the planet now. Their soldiers patrolled the streets. Their ships orbited overhead. Their flag flew from every government building. By all Normal measures, the conquest was complete, but nothing felt complete to Commander Vithal, the occupation. Governor, his reports to the hegemony. High Command grew more confused with each passing week. The humans would not behave like conquered people on every other planet the hegemony had taken. The population became quiet and obedient. After the despair, engines broke their will. They worked when ordered. They obeyed without question. They showed no sign of resistance. The humans showed nothing but resistance, not through weapons or violence, through something far more dangerous. They made jokes. Vithal stood at his window watching a group of humans walk past a patrol of hegemony soldiers. One human whispered something to the others. They all burst out laughing. The soldiers had no idea what the joke was about, but they knew somehow that they were the target. This happened constantly. Humans found ways to mock their conquerors in every situation. They gave the hegemony officers insulting nicknames. They drew silly pictures of soldiers and posted them everywhere. They invented songs about the occupation that spread through the population like wildfire. Worst of all, some of his own soldiers were starting to laugh too. Vithal had already executed 3 soldiers for the crime of finding a human joke funny, but the executions only made things worse. The humans wrote a comedy routine about the executions. They performed it in secret gatherings throughout the city. Even VHL's loyal officers admitted it was clever. This planet is infected, Vithal muttered to himself, infected with madness. Across the galaxy on Earth, the leaders of the United Defense Command studied reports from New Brisbane with great interest. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood before the military council, presenting her analysis of what had happened there. Humor is the key, she explained. It's not just a social behavior, it's a survival mechanism hardwired into human neurology. Our ancestors developed laughter as a way to cope with the constant threat of death. Admiral James Okonkwo leaned forward in his chair. He was a tall man with gray hair and a reputation for unconventional thinking. You're saying that laughing makes us immune to their psychological weapons? Not immune, Dr. Tanaka corrected. Resistant. The despair engines work by targeting fear responses in the brain. They overwhelm the mind with terror until it simply shuts down, but human brains have a bypass mechanism. When fear becomes too great, our minds redirect that energy into humor. We laugh because it is biologically easier than giving up. General Morrison spoke. Next, he was the father of Private Morrison, the young soldier who had started the laughter on New Brisbane. My son didn't do anything special, he said. He just reacted the way humans have always reacted. We joke about death, we mock our fears, it's what we do. Admiral Okonkwo smiled. For the first time since the war began, he saw a path to victory. Then we need to weaponize this. If humor is our greatest strength, we should use it intentionally. The council discussed options for hours. By the end of the meeting, they had developed a new military doctrine unlike anything human history. Every ship in the fleet would carry psychological warfare specialists trained in comedy. Every engagement would include deliberate absurdity designed to confuse and demoralize the enemy. The humans would fight not just with weapons, but with laughter itself. 2 weeks later, the hegemony sent a massive fleet to strike at human core worlds. 300 ships emerged From Fold Space near the human colony of Proxima Station, they outnumbered the human defenders 3-1. Admiral Kethar himself led the attack, eager to redeem his reputation after the strange events. At New Brisbane, the human fleet that met them was half the size of the hegemony force. Admiral Okonkwo commanded from his flagship, the Victory's Punchline. He had chosen the name personally. Open a communication channel to the enemy fleet, he ordered. His communications officer obeyed. Across the void of space, Admiral Kethar's face appeared on the screen. Humans, Kethar said, you are outnumbered, your technology is inferior, surrender now and your death will be quick, Akono grinned. Actually, we have a counter-proposal. Instead of a battle, we suggest a shipwide talent show, winner takes the solar system. We've been practicing, our engineering team does an amazing synchronized dance routine. Kethar stared in confusion. Is this some kind of trick? No trick, we're just really proud of the dance routine. Chief Engineer Patterson worked on it for weeks. It has lifts and everything. You face destruction and you speak of dancing. Well, we could fight instead. But we thought you might appreciate some culture first. Your species seems a bit uptight. When was the last time you had a good dance party? The communication ended with Kethar ordering his fleet to attack. The battle began in earnest. Ships exchanged fire, explosions lit up the darkness of space. Humans and hegemony soldiers alike fought and died in the cold void, but something was different about this battle. On every human ship, the crews maintained an open communication channel that broadcast across all frequencies. As they fought, they talked, not tactical information, not military coordination, jokes. Hey, did anyone else notice the hegemony ships look like angry vacuum cleaners? Pilot asked as he dodged enemy fire. I was thinking more like grumpy toilets. Another pilot replied, really backed up. Grumpy toilets, either way their design. Team needs new ideas. On the destroyer Cosmic Comedian, Captain Sarah Chen led her ship in a desperate charge against a hegemony cruiser twice her size. As the ships exchanged fire, she broadcast a running commentary, and here comes the big guy trying to look intimidating. Oh, no, we're so scared. Whatever will we do? Oh wait, I know Thompson. Fine. Everything at their engine section. Let's see how tough they are without their legs. The Cosmic Comedian took heavy damage in the exchange. Several crew members died, but Captain Chen never stopped talking, never stopped joking, never stopped laughing. Even as her ship burned around her, she found reasons to smile. Good news, everyone, she announced to her crew. The fire in Section 7 is really warm. We can save money on heating. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out on every human vessel. Soldiers cracked jokes while fighting for their lives. Pilots traded puns while executing combat maneuvers. Engineers made ridiculous bets about which systems would fail first. A small scout ship named the Setup rammed directly into a hegemony battle cruiser. As the ship collided, its captain broadcast one final message, and that's the punchline. The explosion that followed destroyed both vessels. The hegemony crews could not process what they were experiencing. They had fought many species across the galaxy. All of them had faced battle with fear or anger or cold determination. None of them had faced battle with joy. The human laughter disturbed them in Ways they could not explain. How could anyone laugh while dying? How could anyone find humor in destruction? The sounds coming through their communication systems seemed like the ravings of madmen. Several hegemony ships began to hesitate. Their crews became uncertain, confused by enemies who seemed almost happy to be in combat. When a human pilot ejected from his destroyed fighter, he spent the entire time waiting for rescue, telling jokes over his emergency beacon. What do you call a hegemony admiral with half a brain gifted? How many hegemony soldiers does it take to change a light bulb? None. They just conquer a planet with brighter lights. The jokes were terrible, truly awful by any objective standard, but that was not the point. The point was that humans could not be intimidated. They could not be broken psychologically. Even in the face of death, they found reasons to laugh. As the battle continued, something unprecedented happened. A hegemony cruiser stopped firing and sent a surrender signal, not because the ship was damaged, not because they were out of ammunition. Captain simply could not take it anymore. We yield, the hegemony captain announced. Make the laughing stop. Please make it stop. Other ships followed. One by one, hegemony vessels surrendered to an enemy they could not understand. Admiral Kethavar watched in disbelief as his fleet fell apart around him. His soldiers were not being defeated by superior firepower. They were being defeated by jokes. By the time the battle ended, the humans had lost 40% of their fleet, a devastating toll by any measure, but the hegemony had lost 60%, and many of those losses came from surrenders rather than destruction. Admiral Okonkwo accepted the enemy surrenders personally. As each hegemony captain came aboard, they asked the same question that Admiral Kethavar had asked at New Brisbane. How can you laugh while dying? Okonkwo gave them all the same answer. We've always been dying. From the moment we're born, we start moving toward death. Our whole species learned long ago that you can spend your life being afraid of the end, or you can spend it finding reasons to laugh along the way. We chose laughter. The captured hegemony officers were treated well. The humans gave them food, medical care, and access to the ship's entertainment systems. Within a week, several of them were caught watching human comedy programs. Within a month, some of them were laughing too. News of the Battle of Proxima spread across the galaxy. Other species, long conquered and hopeless under hegemony rule, heard stories of the humans who laughed at death. They heard about the fleet that joked its way to victory. They heard about an enemy that simply could not be broken. For the first time in generations, some of those conquered species began to wonder if the hegemony could be defeated after all. If laughter was truly a weapon, then perhaps they had weapons of their own that they had forgotten how to use. On Earth, Admiral Okonkwo addressed the planet. The losses at Proxima had been heavy. Many families mourned, but the Admiral spoke not of grief, but of hope. Today we prove something important, he said. We prove that joy is stronger than fear. We prove that laughter can defeat despair. We prove that being human means never giving up the ability to smile. Even in the darkest times, the hegemony has technology we cannot match. They have numbers we cannot equal, but they do not have what we have. They cannot laugh at the darkness, and that will be their downfall. The war was far from over, but humanity had found its weapon. and the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year into the war, and the galaxy was changing in ways no one could have predicted. The hegemony remained powerful, still controlling thousands of worlds, still commanding vast fleets. But something was wrong within their empire. Something was spreading that no weapon could stop. Laughter on the occupied world of New Brisbane. Chen Wei had risen from colonial administrator to leader of the resistance, but her resistance did not fight with guns or bombs. It fought with comedy. Every night at midnight, an illegal broadcast went out across the planet. The humans called it the late night resistance. It was a comedy show that mocked the hegemony occupation in every way imaginable. The hosts made fun of hegemony uniforms. They created silly voices for the alien commanders. They invented ridiculous theories about hegemony biology that spread through the population as running jokes. Did you know one host announced that hegemony soldiers cannot pronounce the letter P. That's why they never visit the restroom. They call it the waste processing facility because they literally cannot say potty. This was completely false, but within a week, every human on New Brisbane was making jokes about hegemony soldiers, and the letter P resistance members would walk past patrols saying words like pineapple, and particularly in perpendicular, just to see if the aliens reacted. The occupation forces had no idea what was happening. They only knew that the humans found something hilarious and that it somehow involved them. Commander Vithal had been replaced 3 times now. Each new commander tried different approaches to suppress the resistance. They banned gatherings. They imposed curfews. They arrested anyone caught laughing in public. Nothing worked. Humans simply moved their comedy underground. They developed secret signals for sharing jokes. They created coded messages hidden in ordinary conversations. They turned the entire occupation into a giant game where the goal was to mock the aliens without getting caught. The worst part from the hegemony perspective was that their own soldiers were being affected. Several guards had been caught listening to the late night resistance in secret. When interrogated, they admitted that they found the show amusing. One soldier even confessed that he had started making up his own jokes. "I don't understand what's happening to me," the soldier said. "I hear a human say something absurd and my face does something strange. My mouth curves upward. Sounds come from my chest. Is this a disease?" The hegemony medical corps had no explanation. Laughter was not supposed to exist in their species. They had eliminated it through genetic engineering 10,000 years ago. They had recognized it as a weakness that undermined discipline and order. Society that laughed at its leaders could not be properly controlled. But exposure to humans was somehow reactivating these ancient impulses. Soldiers who spent too much time around humans started showing symptoms. First, they would smile at inappropriate moments, then they would make amused sounds. Eventually they would laugh openly, unable to stop themselves. Hegemony called it humor contamination. It was spreading faster than any disease. Far from New Brisbane, the war continued across multiple fronts. Human military had fully embraced psychological warfare as a core strategy. Every engagement included deliberate absurdity designed to confuse and destabilize the enemy. Human ships broadcast constant streams of comedy across all frequencies. Pilots developed signature catchphrases that they repeated during combat. One famous ace pilot always announced his attacks by saying, "Knock knock," before firing his weapons. The hegemony crews learned to dread those words. The human propaganda department created something called memes. These were simple images combined with text that spread through communication networks like viruses. The hegemony had never encountered anything like them. A picture of a hegemony admiral with a silly caption would appear in one corner of the galaxy. Within days, it would spread to every human outpost, colony, and ship. The humans would modify it, add new captions, create variations. By the end of the week, that single image had evolved into hundreds of different versions, each one mocking the enemy. New ways the hegemony tried to block these transmissions. They failed. They tried to create counter-propaganda, but hegemony propaganda was serious and intimidating, designed to inspire fear. The humans simply made fun of it. Every threatening hegemony message became raw material for new jokes. Surrender or face annihilation became surrender or face a mild inconvenience. The hegemony is invincible became the hegemony is invisible. Wait, no, I can see them. Never mind. Resistance is futile became resistance is futile, but we're doing it anyway because it's funny. Supreme Commander Zethil convened an emergency meeting of the hegemony High Council. He was the oldest and most powerful military leader in the empire. With a record of conquests spanning 3 centuries, he had never faced an enemy like this. The human threat has evolved beyond military concern, he announced to the council. They are attacking the psychological foundations of our empire. Their humor is spreading to our subject species. The reports confirmed his fears. On dozens of occupied worlds, the local populations were showing signs of humor contamination. Species that had been docile and obedient for generations were suddenly making jokes about their hegemony masters. The Velari, a species conquered 2,000 years ago, had developed something called comedy clubs. These were gathering places where Velari would take turns trying to make each other laugh. The jokes were crude and simple, but the laughter was real. The Crix, an insectoid species known for absolute obedience, had started using sarcasm. Hegemony officers would give orders, and the Crick would respond with exaggerated enthusiasm that somehow felt mocking. "Oh, yes, great master, we will certainly polish your boots with maximum efficiency. It is the highest honor to touch your wonderful footwear." Even these, a species so thoroughly conquered that they had forgotten their own history, had begun to remember. Someone had translated human comedy programs into their language. These discovered that they could laugh. After all, the discovery changed everything. The humans call this a meme war, Zethil continued. They believe they can destabilize our empire through ridicule alone, and they may be correct. The council debated for hours. Some argued for increased military action against human worlds. Others suggested withdrawing from occupied territories where humor contamination had spread too far. A few even wondered if the hegemony should attempt to develop their own humor as a countermeasure. This last suggestion was rejected immediately. The hegemony had eliminated humor precisely because it was dangerous. A soldier who could laugh at his officers might not obey them. Citizen who could mock the government might not fear it. Humor was chaos and The hegemony was built on order, but humans proved that chaos could be a weapon. On New Brisbane, Chen Wei received word that the late night resistance had spread beyond her planet. Other occupied worlds were picking up the broadcasts and creating their own versions. A Villari comedy troupe had started performing human-style jokes to packed audiences. A Crick's Workers collective had developed musical comedy that mocked their overseers through song. The revolution was spreading, and it spread through laughter. Chen addressed her resistance cell with new instructions. We are not just fighting for ourselves anymore, she said. Every joke we tell, every laugh we share, plants a seed in someone else's mind. The hegemony rules through fear. They break people's spirits and convince them that resistance is pointless, but we've proven that they cannot break human spirits. Now we need to prove that they cannot break anyone's spirit. Resistance intensified its efforts. They began smuggling comedy recordings to other occupied worlds. They trained aliens in the art of joke-telling. They created a network of underground comedians spanning dozens of species and hundreds of planets. The hegemony tried to stop them. They arrested comedians. They destroyed transmission equipment. They executed anyone caught distributing humor materials. But laughter is not a physical thing. It cannot be confiscated or destroyed. Once a species learns to laugh, they cannot unlearn it. The sound of joy once discovered echoes forever. Commander Zethal reviewed the latest intelligence reports alone in his private chamber. The numbers told clear story. Productivity was down on every occupied world, showing signs of humor contamination. Obedience rates were falling. Revolutionary activity was increasing. The empire was not crumbling from military defeat. It was giggling itself apart. For the first time in his long life, Zethal felt something that might have been despair. He had spent 3 centuries building and maintaining the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known. He had conquered species that had seemed unconquerable. He had crushed rebellions with overwhelming force, but he did not know how to fight. Jokes on his desks had a captured human device containing recordings of the late night resistance. Intelligence officers had given it to him to demonstrate the enemy's propaganda techniques. Against his better judgment, Zethal activated the device. The hosts appeared on the screen, grinning with their ridiculous human faces. They launched into a routine about the hegemony High Council. They imagined what the council meetings must be like, portraying the supreme leaders as confused old men who could not figure out how to work simple technology. And then Commander Zill tried to give a speech, one host said, but he accidentally activated the self-destruct sequence on the podium, so he spent the entire meeting just standing very still, hoping no one noticed. It was absurd. It was disrespectful. It was factually incorrect in every way. Zethal watched the entire episode. When it ended, he sat in silence for a long time. Something strange had happened to his face. His mouth had curved upward slightly. A small sound had escaped his chest, quickly suppressed. He deleted the recording immediately and never spoke of it again. But in the darkness of his private chamber, alone where no one could see him, Supreme Commander Zethal had done the impossible. He had almost laughed. The war continued. Hegemony remained powerful. The outcome was far from certain, but humanity had proven something profound. The greatest weapon against tyranny was not military might, it was the simple, stubborn, irrepressible ability to find joy in the darkest moments, to laugh at fear, to mock despair, to turn suffering into comedy and oppression into a punchline. The galaxy was learning to laugh again, and the hegemony had no defense. 2 years had passed since the invasion of New Brisbane. Snorts, the war had settled into a strange stalemate. The hegemony still controlled most of the galaxy, their fleet still outnumbered humanity by 100 to 1. By any rational measure, they should have crushed the human rebellion long ago, but the hegemony was not fighting a military war anymore. They were fighting a war of ideas, and ideas could not be killed with weapons. Cheney stood before the United Earth Council telling the story of New Brisbane. She had been evacuated from the occupied planet through a dangerous rescue mission brought to Earth as a symbol of resistance. Her fame had spread throughout human space. We never defeated the hegemony militarily, she explained to the Council. They still control our planet. They still patrol our streets. They still occupy our buildings, but they do not control our minds. We discovered that humor is our greatest defense. We learned to laugh at our oppressors, and once we started laughing, we could not be broken. Admiral Okonkwo nodded from his seat. The same principle applies to our military engagements. We cannot match hegemony firepower, but we've won more battles through psychological disruption than through superior tactics. Their soldiers cannot fight effectively against enemies who seem to be enjoying themselves. General Morrison added his perspective. The reports from occupied territories confirm what Chenwei is describing. Every world where humans have made contact shows signs of what the hegemony calls humor contamination. Local populations are learning to laugh. Revolutionary movements are growing. The hegemony is losing control from the inside. The Council discussed the implications for hours. The situation was unprecedented in galactic history. No empire had ever fallen to jokes before, but the evidence suggested that the hegemony was genuinely vulnerable in ways that no previous enemy had exploited. Across the galaxy, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Admiral Kethvar, the commander who had first attacked New Brisbane, sat alone in a small room on a human space station. He had requested asylum 3 months ago, surrendering himself in his personal flagship to human forces. Since then he had been studied, interviewed, and questioned by human scientists, trying to understand the hegemony psychology. Today he met with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the xenopsychologist who had first identified humor as humanity's secret weapon. Tell me about your species, she said, before the genetic modifications, before you eliminated humor. Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. I have studied the ancient records. 10,000 years ago, my ancestors were different. They experienced emotions that modern hegemony citizens no longer feel: joy, playfulness, the impulse to find absurdity in serious situations, laughter. Tanaka said, yes. We called it something else, but yes. The records describe it as a sound of pleasure made when the mind perceived unexpected connections or absurd contradictions. Why did your species eliminate it? Kethar's face showed what might have been sadness, though his species had supposedly eliminated that emotion as well. Our leaders believed that humor was dangerous. A citizen who laughed might question authority. Soldier who found things amusing might not take order seriously. Laughter was chaos, and our civilization was built on order, so you engineered it out of your genetics over many generations. Yes, we removed the neural pathways that created humor. We eliminated the capacity for playfulness. We made ourselves serious, focused, obedient. We became the perfect soldiers, the perfect citizens, the perfect conquerors. Tanaka leaned forward. But you've been studying humans for 2 years now. You've been exposed to our humor constantly. Has anything changed? Keith did not answer. Immediately, his face showed a strained expression, one that Tanaka had learned to recognize. Yes, he finally admitted. Something has changed. The genetic modifications suppressed our capacity for humor, but they did not destroy it completely. Exposure to humans has reactivated ancient pathways in my brain. I experience sensations now that I cannot name. When I watch human comedy programs, my face does unexpected things. Sometimes sounds escape from my chest before I can stop them. You're learning to laugh, Tanaka said. I am trying to understand what laughter is, Keith corrected. I am trying to understand why humans value it so highly, why you would rather die laughing than live in despair. Tanaka smiled. Because laughter is freedom. When you can laugh at something, it loses power over you. When you can find absurdity in fear, fear becomes smaller. When you can make jokes about death, death becomes less terrifying. Humor is how humans process the worst parts of existence and transform them into something bearable. Kever considered this. The hegemony was built on fear. We control our subjects by making them afraid of us. Our despair engines work by amplifying that fear until it becomes overwhelming. Exactly, and that's why humor defeats your weapons. You can't make someone afraid of something they're laughing at. The two emotions cannot exist in the same mind at the same time. Then the hegemony's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. Keithvar said slowly. We built an empire on fear, and we eliminated our own ability to understand its opposite. We created the perfect weapon against despair, and then we encountered a species that refuses to feel despair. Now you understand why we're winning. Far from Earth on the hegemony home world, Supreme Commander Zethil faced a crisis unlike any in his 3 centuries of service. The reports on his desk told a story of collapse. 17 core worlds had experienced major rebellions in the past month. All of them had started the same way. Laughter. Someone would tell a joke about the hegemony. Others would repeat it. Soon the joke would spread until everyone knew it, and once an entire population was laughing at their rulers, they stopped being afraid. Theory uprising had begun with a comedy show. The performers had mocked the local hegemony governor so effectively that citizens started repeating the jokes whenever they saw his soldiers. Within weeks, the population had organized a rebellion. The governor had been forced to flee, pursued by crowds chanting comedy routines. The Creek Rebellion followed a similar pattern. Their insectoid species had developed what they called satirical hive songs, complex musical compositions that mock the hegemony while pretending to praise them. The songs spread through their communication networks until every 6th colony was singing variations. The hegemony forces could not tell if They were being insulted or honored, which somehow made the insults more effective, even the most thoroughly subjugated species in the Empire had found their voice, human. Comedians had traveled to the space and performed shows for their populations. These had not understood humor at first. They had forgotten how to laugh. But the humans were patient, explaining jokes, teaching the concept of absurdity, helping them rediscover an ability their ancestors had possessed. When these finally learned to laugh, again they laughed for days, the sound of millions of these experiencing joy for the first time echoed across their worlds, and when the laughter faded, what remained was anger at the hegemony for taking that joy away from them. Zethal read the casualty reports from the sector. His forces had been overwhelmed not by superior weapons, but by sheer numbers. These had risen up everywhere all at once, united by shared jokes that spread faster than military communications could track. "We are losing the psychological war," one of his advisors reported. "Our subjects no longer fear us, they mock us openly. Our soldiers are being affected as well. Humor contamination has spread to 20% of frontline units. Execute the contaminated soldiers," Zethriel ordered. "We tried that, Commander. It made things worse." The humans turned our executions into a comedy routine. They called it the hegemony's last laugh. Now, our own soldiers repeat the jokes before their executions, laughing as they die. Zethil slammed his fist against the table. "How do we fight this? How do we defeat an enemy that welcomes death with a smile?" No one had an answer. In his private chamber that night, Zethal reviewed the intelligence reports alone. The data was clear. The hegemony was not losing because of military weakness. It was losing because its fundamental strategy no longer worked. For 10,000 years they had controlled the galaxy. Through fear, they had eliminated their own capacity for joy so that they could be perfect instruments of terror. They had created weapons that targeted despair because despair was what they understood, but they had created a civilization that could not adapt to an enemy that refused to despair. A message arrived on Zethal's private communication channel. It was from Admiral Okonkwo, the human commander who had defeated Cathvar at Proxima, Supreme Commander. The message read, "I have a proposal not for surrender, but for something else. Your empire is falling apart, and both of us know that more fighting will only accelerate the collapse. I believe there is another way. We propose a meeting. Not for war. For comedy. Let us show you what you have been missing for 10,000 years. Let us teach you to laugh. If we succeed, the war ends. If we fail, you can conquer us through conventional means. What do you have to lose?" Zethal read the message several times. The proposal was absurd. The idea that the Supreme Commander of the hegemony would attend a comedy show was ridiculous, but then again, that was probably the point. After a long silence, Zethal began composing his reply against every principle he had lived by for 300 years, against every instinct of his genetically modified mind. He found himself agreeing to the terms. The comedy summit would take place on the hegemony home world. The fate of the galaxy would be decided by jokes. And somewhere deep in Zethril's ancient brain, pathways that had been dormant for millennia began to stir. Hegemony home world had never seen anything like this. A small human diplomatic ship descended through the Atmosphere carrying not soldiers or diplomats but comedians. The fate of a galactic war rested on their ability to make one person laugh. Chenwei looked out the window as the ship approached the capital city. Massive towers of dark metal rose from the ground, designed to inspire fear and awe. There was no color anywhere, no art, no decoration. Everything was functional and intimidating. Cheerful place, she muttered. Admiral Okonkwo sat beside her, reviewing the plan one more time. Remember, we're not here to make jokes about them. That's too easy, and Zithra will expect it. We need to show him something deeper. We need to help him laugh at himself. The ship landed in a vast plaza surrounded by thousands of hegemony soldiers. Supreme Commander Zithal himself waited at the entrance to the government tower, flanked by his personal guards. He was ancient by any species standards, his body showing the wear of 3 centuries of warfare. His face showed nothing. The human delegation approached slowly. Akono led them with Chenwei at his side. Behind them came Earth's finest comedians, selected not for their fame but for their ability to connect with audiences who did not share their culture. Supreme Commander Okonkwo said with a slight bow, "Thanks snorts you for agreeing to this meeting." Zil and LT Unk and GT voice was cold. "I agreed because I wanted to understand your species before I destroyed you. Your terms were ridiculous. Make me laugh in the war. And do you truly believe this is possible?" "I believe laughter is the one thing all sapient minds share," Akona replied. "Your species eliminated the capacity for humor 10,000 years ago, but you did not destroy it completely. The potential is still there, buried deep in your genetics. We're just here to help you find it again." The delegation was led inside the tower to a vast chamber that served as the hegemony's ceremonial hall. A simple stage had been erected at one end. Thousands of hegemony officers filled the seats, all watching with the same expressionless faces. Zithal took his place on an elevated throne at the center of the room. His guards surrounded him. His advisors watched from behind. Every detail was designed to demonstrate his absolute power. "You may begin," he said. The first comedian took the stage. His name was Marcus Bell, and he specialized in observational humor. He launched into a routine about the absurdities of daily life, the small frustrations that everyone experienced, the silly things that humans did without thinking. The hegemony audience sat in total silence. They did not understand why forgetting where you put your keys was supposed to be funny. They did not experience frustration with household objects. They had servants for such things. Marcus completed his set without a single response. He walked off stage looking defeated. The second comedian tried physical comedy. She fell down, made silly faces, pretended to hurt herself in ridiculous ways. In human culture, this type of humor was universal, triggering automatic laughter. Even babies. The hegemony watched impassively. Physical comedy required empathy to be effective. The audience needed to imagine themselves in the performer's position. These aliens had been engineered to suppress empathy along with humor. She left the stage to the same silence. One by one, the human comedians tried their best material: political satire, wordplay, absurdist scenarios, musical comedy, story-based humor. Each performer adapted their routine, trying to find something that would connect with the alien audience. Nothing worked. Zethal remained motionless on his throne, his face showing no reaction to any of the performances. His officers sat equally still. The only sound in the vast chamber was the voice of each comedian echoing against walls that seemed to absorb all joy. Hours passed. The human delegation grew increasingly worried. They had brought their finest performers, and none of them had even come close to making Zethal smile. Finally, there were no more scheduled performers. The last comedian left the stage to crushing silence. Akono felt his heart sink. The plan had failed. The war would continue. Millions more would die. Then Chenny stood up. Wait, she said, I want to try. Akinquo looked at her in surprise. You're not a comedian. No, but I understand something these performers don't. They're trying to make him laugh at external things. That's not how humans learn to laugh. We learn to laugh at ourselves. She walked to the stage before anyone could stop her. The hegemony audience watched with the same blank expressions they had shown all day. Zethal did not move. Chen Wei stood alone in the center of the stage. She did not tell jokes. She did not perform. She simply spoke. My name is Chen Wei. I was the administrator of New Brisbane when your fleet invaded. I was there when your despair engines activated. I felt what they did to my mind, the crushing weight of hopelessness that tried to break my will. She paused, remembering. Do you know what I did? I wet myself. I was so terrified that I lost control of my own body like a child. The great leader of the resistance stood in a puddle of her own urine while aliens bombed her planet. A small murmur went through the human delegation. Chen Wei had never shared this story publicly. I spent the first 3 hours of the invasion hiding under a desk, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I convinced myself that I was going to die, that everyone I loved was going to die, that everything I had worked for was meaningless. I was ready to give up. She looked directly at Zethal. Then Private Morrison started laughing, and I realized something. I was ridiculous, not brave, not heroic, just ridiculous. A grown woman hiding under furniture crying about the end of the world. Absurdity of it hit me all at once. I started laughing too. Not because anything was funny, because I was pathetic, and admitting I was pathetic somehow made me feel better. I couldn't stop the invasion. I couldn't save my planet. I couldn't even control my own bladder, but I could laugh at myself for being such a mess. She spread her hands. That's the secret, Supreme Commander. Human courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and ridiculous at the same time. We're all scared. We're all failures in dozens of small ways every day. We trip over things. We forget important meetings. We say stupid things at the worst possible moments. We cry, we panic, we hide under desks, but we laugh about it. We tell stories about our worst moments and turn them into comedy. We share our embarrassments with each other until they become funny instead of shameful. That's how we survive, not by being brave, but by admitting we're not brave and finding that admission hilarious. Chen Wei looked at Zethal's ancient face. When was the last time you admitted you were scared? When was the last time you let yourself be ridiculous? When was the last time you made a mistake and told someone about it, not as a confession, but as a funny story? The silence stretched out. You've spent 3 Centuries being perfect, Chenwei continued, never showing weakness, never admitting fear, never letting anyone see. You fail, that's exhausting, that's lonely, that's absurd. You've conquered 1,000 worlds, but you can't admit that you don't know how to use your own communication device without help. You've commanded millions of soldiers, but you've never told a single one of them about the stupid things you did when you were young. Do you want to know the funniest thing in the galaxy? The most powerful being in existence, commander of the greatest military force ever assembled, ruler of 1,000 worlds, and you've probably tripped over your own robe at least once. You've probably walked into a door when you were distracted. You've probably forgotten someone's name and had to pretend you remembered. That's all. Laughter is Supreme Commander. It's permission to be imperfect. It's freedom from the exhausting need to always be control. It's the most powerful being in the galaxy, admitting that he's just as ridiculous as everyone else. Chenifo. Silent. Zithrill did not move. His face remained expressionless. The chamber was utterly still. Then something changed. It started with his eyes. They shifted slightly, showing something that had not been there before. His mouth twitched, just barely, the muscles moving in ways they had never moved. A sound emerged from his chest. It was small and strange, almost like a cough, but it repeated, growing slightly louder each time. His shoulders began to shake. Sound became recognizable. It was a laugh. It was rough and unpracticed. The laugh of someone who had never used those muscles before. It sounded almost painful, like a machine starting up after centuries of disuse. But it was unmistakably laughter. Zethal, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Hegemony, was laughing, not at the humans, not at their jokes, at himself, at 300 years of pretending to be perfect, at the absurdity of ruling a galaxy while being unable to admit simple weaknesses, at the ridiculous image of the most feared being in existence tripping over snorts his own robe. The laughter spread. His officers, trained for obedience, watched their commander make strange sounds and found their own faces doing unexpected things. One by one, they began to laugh too. The chamber that had been designed to inspire fear filled with sound of joy. Zill's laughter continued for a long time. When snorts had finally stopped, tears ran down his face, tears that his species had also supposedly eliminated. I never told anyone, he said quietly, that on my first day as Supreme Commander I walked into the wrong room and gave my acceptance speech to the cleaning staff. I was so embarrassed that I had those cleaners transferred to the other side of the galaxy. Chen smiled. That's pretty funny. It is. Zethal agreed. It really is. The war ended that day, not with a treaty or a surrender, but with a shared joke between enemies who discovered they were not so different after all. 1 year later, Chenwei sat on a hillside on New Brisbane, watching children play in the fields below. The planet had been rebuilt. The occupation was over. Humans and former hegemony citizens lived together in the colony, learning from each other. Beside her sat Keith, the admiral who had once tried to destroy her world. He had become her friend over the past year, one of many unexpected friendships that had emerged from the war. You know what the funniest thing is? Chenny asked. Kever made the expression his species now called a smile. What? We almost lost. We were so close to giving up during the invasion. If Morrison hadn't started giggling Everything would be different. The entire galaxy changed because one scared soldier couldn't stop laughing at how ridiculous everything was. Keith nodded. And now we all laugh. The galaxy's oldest weapon defeated by the galaxy's oldest response to danger. Life is strange, Cheney said. Life is funny. Cathar corrected. Below them, children of multiple species ran through the grass, their laughter mixing together in the warm afternoon air. Somewhere in the distance, someone was telling a joke. The punchline carried on the wind, followed by the sound of dozens of voices laughing together. The hegemony had tried to conquer the galaxy through fear. Humanity had set it free with laughter, and across 1,000 worlds, species that had forgotten how to smile were learning all over again. The sound of their joy echoed through the stars. Celebration that would never end. Because once you learn to laugh, you never forget. And once the galaxy learned to laugh together, nothing would ever be the